Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this BioIT World Web Symposium. Today we will be talking on the subject of enhancing clinical operations with digital signatures, and we are very grateful to ARX for their support of this subject. My name is Kevin Davis. I'm the editor of BioIT World and the author of The $1,000 Genome, a book that came out just over a year ago, which has precious little to do with today's subject, but I thought I would mention it anyway. Today, in fact, we're here to talk about the adoption of digital signatures in life sciences organizations, particularly in the eclinical trials space, where companies are finding more and more that by reducing the use of paper and integrating digital signatures, they can produce faster site and study initiation. Our guest speaker today, who I will introduce more fully in just a couple of minutes, is Rod Schlurf from ARX. And he will take us through the better part of the hour, but we will have plenty of time in that window for questions. So a very brief introduction before I hand the microphone over to Rod. Digital signatures have been around for the better part of nearly 10 years now, but life science companies, more recently of late, starting to recognize that they provide a valuable means to maintain compliance with the strictest industry regulations while achieving trusted electronic document exchange that spans geographies and organizations. Digitally signed documents enable any party to easily validate signer identity and intent and content integrity without reliance on proprietary verification technology. They allow organizations to automate approval processes and enjoy streamlined operations, enhanced efficiency, and reduced organizational costs. What we hope that you will take away from this web symposium is how digital signatures can be applied in clinical operations to speed study and site initiation, automate site monitoring reporting, enhance investigator portals, and support regulatory compliance. You'll also hear how digital signatures can enable secure document exchange and electronic submissions. We're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. Indeed, I thank many of you who've already submitted questions at the website where you registered for this symposium. But during the course of Rod's presentation, you'll be able to enter questions in the chat box that you see on the screen in front of you. You can do that at any time, and we will try to get through as many of those questions as we can in the next 55 minutes or so. Our guest speaker today is Rod Schlurf, who is FDA and USDA Markets Manager for ARX. Rod is based in Baltimore. He has more than 20 years of experience in electronic signatures for FDA-regulated markets and has really led ARX to become today the largest supplier of digital signatures in FDA-regulated industries. As a result, life science organizations, not just here in the US, but around the world, are benefiting from reduced costs, faster operations, regulatory compliance, secure document exchange, and enhanced electronic submissions to the FDA. Rod, it's a great pleasure to have you in the webinar today, and we're looking forward to you speaking for, I think, about 30 minutes or so, and then we will, assuming there are any questions at the end, we'll take them from the audience. I'll rejoin you to go through those questions. So, Rod, thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks to the attendees to today's webinar. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Rod Schlurf. And just a little disclosure here, as Kevin mentioned, I do work for a digital signature vendor, ARX. We provide a product named CoSign. However, in today's webinar, I'm not going to be discussing my company's product, but talking more about the use of digital signatures, regardless of the technology, across various applications in the life sciences industry and in the clinical market particularly. So the agenda today is we're going to discuss the three most common applications for digital signatures in GCP GMP operations, including quality, audit, and compliance documentation used to support an audit, site monitoring reports, so CRAs and clinical staff that need to sign off on reports and submit them to sponsors, as well as certain applications related to eclinical technologies, eclinical portals, in particular regulatory packet documents that constitute part of the electronic trial master file. And we'll consider the value of digital signatures from the perspectives of the major players, clinical research organizations, the sponsors of the studies, but also some of the other suppliers, SaaS vendors and software vendors, providing these technologies to the marketplace. We'll reference some specific value at some of these CROs and biopharmas. Before I get started, I just wanted to review a few surveys completed by AIM, the Association of Information Management, related to digital signatures. not specific to life sciences, but in general across all industry. So again, why digital signatures need to go paperless. You can see in this chart that of the organizations that were polled, the majority of these organizations, over 50%, estimated that over half of their documents are printed solely for the purpose of adding a signature. So the only reason they're printing these documents, over half of their documents, is because they need one or more signatures. Why is digital signatures needed to go paperless? Companies have invested in electronic document management and workflow technologies. However, the poll asked these companies how many of their automated workflows are interrupted or prematurely stopped because they need a physical sign-off on a document. And for just less than half of these companies, that said that half of their workflows are halted because they need a physical sign-off. And this obviously is where a digital signature comes into play. So how does this pertain to our world, the life sciences marketplace and the clinical ecosystem specifically? Well, all the different players that it takes to bring a drug from preclinical to commercialization have not only their own internal operations and document requirements, but there's many documents that are required to be signed by one party and shared and exchanged with other parties. So with digital signatures, we're going to concentrate on the value within an organization, but also start to extend this out and understand how digital signatures are able to bridge trust among multiple organizations working on a clinical study. So again, we could talk about lots of different applications for digital signatures within the biopharmaceutical and medical device industries, including preclinical, commercial manufacturing, and other operations. But we're going to focus today on these three main applications within clinical development. Since the question inevitably will come up is how do digital signatures pertain to the FDA's 21 CFR Part 11 requirements for electronic records and electronic signatures? Many different types of electronic signature solutions can be deployed and used in a Part 11 compliant manner. However, there's certain sections within Part 11 that specifically call for digital signatures. In particular, in paragraph 11.30, controls for open systems, the FDA specifically calls for appropriate digital signatures to be used. Now, the definition of an open system is somewhat open to debate. From my perspective, an open system would be any system where documentation is signed within one organization. It needs to be shared and trusted and verified by other organizations. So any documentation that bridges across one organization to the other or as part of an electronic submission to a regulatory authority. A little definition about what a digital signature is. So in the electronic signature world, there's many variations in technologies and approaches to electronic signatures. However, there's only a single standard. The standard is known as PKI, or a digital signature in layman's terms, and it is a standard form of electronic signature. These standards are published and maintained by several parties. Here in the U.S., it is the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, NIST, and these same standards are also embraced by other parties and other governments around the world. For the folks listening in Europe or organizations that have operations in Europe, note that the electronic signature directive of the EU and the country-specific electronic signature legislation all defines qualified or advanced electronic signatures as needing to be digital signatures. So whereas in the U.S. we're a little more loosey-goosey on what's a valid and legally recognized electronic signature, in Europe and other countries around the world, oftentimes the requirements are for a digital signature only. With digital signatures, the technology can be used to sign multiple things, including documents, but also data stored in a database or transactions. But typically in the life sciences marketplace, we're talking about signing of a document, an Office document, a PDF document, or another file format. Because of the FDA's 21 CFR Part 11, there's a few requirements that need to take place before a document can be signed. So someone opens up this document on their PC or accesses it through a web browser. They're first asked and challenged to present their credentials. Typically, this is a username and password, although there's other authentication schemes that could be used to prove who you are before you can sign a document. In addition, the FDA requires the entry of a reason code, why am I signing this document? With most technologies, you can establish a global list of reasons that the signers can choose from, or you could allow the local signer to choose any reason they see fit in order to sign the document. Once this takes place, then the signing ceremony commences and is completed within fractions of a second. And this is all conducted within a secure, encrypted signing environment. Sometimes this is a server-based solution, such as with our CoSign product, or it could be a smart card or USB token that's securely protected. Regardless, what happens is the document contents to be signed are calculated as a mathematical equivalency, known as a document hash or a content hash. This is then signed with the unique signing key of the individual who authenticated themselves, as well as an ID card known as a digital certificate is embedded, and this constitutes the digital signature, which is then bound back to the document. So the result of this signing operation is you have a fully digitally signed electronic record with one or more digital signatures that can be trusted and verified by any party without any access to the technology that was used to create the signatures. In fact, even if the company that created the signature, the technology used to create the signature, are completely out of business, 50 years from now, you can still open up that document and verify who signed the document, when they signed the document, why they signed the document, and you can verify that no changes took place to that document, or if so, what those changes were. As I mentioned before, there's multiple parties that support this digital signature standard, including the standards body themselves. In the U.S., this is the federal PKI and NIST, as well as in Europe, the European Union's Electronic Signature Directive and other entities. There's suppliers that care about this standard. So suppliers such as ARX and our CoSign product and many of the other competitors, typically these other vendors are people like VeriSign or GeoTrust or Entrust or RSA, companies that provide digital certificates that you then take and integrate with your infrastructure. And then there's the ISVs, the companies that deliver desktop productivity applications or other business systems. And they want to be able to support just a single digital signature standard and know that this support will work regardless of the vendor that was chosen for the digital signature supply. This includes PDFs. Obviously, Adobe has had wonderful support for digital signatures for many years. But now the PDF standard is an ISO standard, so ISO incorporates the digital signature standard in ISO 32000 definition for PDF archive. Microsoft Office and other Microsoft applications support digital signatures. TIFF, and any application that supports open standards like Microsoft CAPI, PKCS 11, and others. As I mentioned before, digital signatures could also be used to sign things other than documents, such as data or XML. Since we're not going to provide a demonstration of how to digitally sign a document today, I thought I'd give you a quick peek of what a digitally signed document looks like. In this case, we're taking a look at a digitally signed PDF, or at least parts of it. So for every digital signature that's embedded in a PDF, you'll see visible information about the signer and the signing ceremony, including information about the name of the signer, the job title, the reason code, the time date stamp associated with when the signature was applied, and perhaps other information like the email address of the signer. With certain technologies, you can also automatically include your handwritten signature or other graphical images such as your corporate logo. In this case, my signature includes my John Hancock, my Rod Schlerf, that I registered with my account. And then with PDF, depending on the version of Reader or other PDF viewer that you're using, you'll see graphical indication of whether the signature should be trusted, not trusted, or have questionable trust. And since a digital signature is an active component of the document itself, you can click on the signature and see additional metadata about the signature properties. And this includes more information about the identity of the signer. In this case, you'll notice that the email address of the signer is included. I can drill down and see this ID card, this digital certificate of the signer, see who issued it, why I'm trusting it, how long it's valid for, and other information. Again, the reason code and time date stamp, as well as information about the integrity of the document, hasn't been altered. Now, digital signatures are supported in multiple file formats, However, the PDF format is the most popular format for digital signatures today. For one, in our market, the FDA and other regulatory authorities prefer PDFs, but also the way that PDFs support digital signatures is that with every digital signature that's applied to a PDF document, a version of that document is created and associated with each one of those digital signatures. So in other words, if I have 3 digital signatures in a single PDF file, I actually have 3 versions of that document that carry forward with that single file, and I can go back and take a look at what the contents looked like when signature number 1 was applied. In fact, I can compare the contents for when that signature was applied to what the contents look like today. Another reason for digital signatures I talked about is the ability in an open system or a secure document exchange to be able to trust and verify documents. So the value of digital signatures is that trust verification can be performed not only by the employees of the signing organization, but also by all these external parties, customers, suppliers, partners, the FDA, and other regulators. So with digital signatures, you're creating electronic records that are fully self-contained, portable, and sustainable that span geographies, organizations, technologies, and across time. So that's the background on digital signatures, and now we'll focus on digital signature use in the 3 most common applications in clinical. First application I'll talk about is quality audit and compliance operations. Here we're talking about controlled documentation used to support an audit. These would be SOPs and work instructions, training records, and other project and task-specific documentation that would be used in an audit to show that you're adhering to your SOPs. All the different players in that clinical ecosystem that I showed before have this application. They all have their own internal SOPs they need to follow, and they're subject to audit. Oftentimes, particularly in large pharmaceutical companies and more companies today, these type of documents are handled electronically in an electronic document management system, such as SharePoint, or in a specific quality management system. But there's still a lot of companies today that sign documents in paper, maybe scan them and store them on a shared file drive, or sometimes even just leave them with pen and paper stored in file cabinets. When we look at digital signatures, it's often called the 3rd wave of compliance to 21 CFR Part 11. So the first wave of compliance started back in April of 1997, and even before, upon the first release of 21 CFR Part 11. And these were companies that perceived some requirements from the FDA and began remediating existing computer systems to comply with their interpretation of what Part 11 required. But almost immediately after this, companies like Documentum put forth the concept of a huge repository of quality-controlled documents. And over time, these companies began to introduce proprietary electronic signatures for signing and approving these documents. So a proprietary electronic signature means that you're authenticating and enter a reason code and associating this information with the document stored inside the repository of the quality management system. It's Part 11 compliant. It works if you have a license and access to that document management system, but you can extract signed documents and share them with other individuals that are not licensed or other entities that aren't part of your own organization. Or if you ever decided that you wanted to replace that document management system with a new document management system, you were stuck with a legacy system. So the 3rd wave really started back around year 2000, 2001, in our market led by J&J and Pfizer, who began to deploy digital signatures. So with digital signatures, you're actually signing the documents. The documents have trust independent of the repository. So you can take documents, send them to individuals that don't have a license, don't have access to Documentum or another system. And you could replace these systems over time without having to concern yourselves about Part 11 compliance. So today, most of the major electronic document management, EDM vendors, support digital signatures. This includes the Microsoft SharePoint and SharePoint-based quality management systems. Companies like NextDocs, with every system they sell, they include a standard digital signature support. Or the traditional document management, quality management vendors, they're now migrating to support SharePoint or embed the technology as part of their standard offering, as well as many of the leading workflow vendors that bolt onto these systems, companies like Nintex and K2. The benefit to end-user organizations for using digital signatures in quality and audit operations is fourfold. This includes increased security and compliance to support audits, but more importantly, we hear back from these companies is that there's ways they can comply and be secure, but the ability to get documentation signed and secured quickly is the major driver for digital signatures, as well as obviously reducing all the costs associated with paper documents. As I mentioned before, by using digital signatures, you're severing the electronic records and the signatures from the document repository, which gives you the flexibility and agility to migrate to newer and better technologies in the future. Going back to an AIM study, looking at the three top reasons for using digital signatures, again, this is across all industries, I would have thought that everyone would have said saving money, which obviously is a major driver, but the top two reasons are actually saving time, speeding up approval processes, and limiting the downtime it takes of staff to be able to scan, copy, route, sign documents. With deployments of digital signatures in quality and audit operations, you always have to consider how you're credentialing a user to be able to digitally sign documents. Before someone can sign, you need to prove who they are. Quality management systems are a very closed system, not an open system as I described before, but digital signatures are used prevalently in this application. Note that almost all of the signers would be internal employees of the signing organization, and for the most part, all the verifiers as well. So I'm not sending documents, quality documents, typically to outside parties. So identity verification is very easy since they're your own employees. These employees have been onboarded, they've been ID-proofed according to your HR policies. Typically, they're then given access to the network directory structures, Active Directory or LDAP, and they authenticate against the network access by using Active Directory or LDAP credentials, username and password. So this ultimately is known as high assurance digital signatures, the highest level of confidence you have that the person that's signing a document has been properly vetted in order to sign. The next application I'll talk about is related to site monitoring operations. So we're talking about documentation that a CRA might have to sign, as well as maybe a project manager, after visiting a site or closing out a site. So this is the field-based CRA, typically working out of a home or remote office. It needs to agree with their project manager what the final format of the report is and content, and then need to sign and, in the case of the CRO, submit this back to the sponsor within 10 business days. Sometimes these reports are generated as part of a clinical trial management system, but many companies today still use Word or PDF, or some even still use paper forms with wet ink signatures that need to be priority mailed and managed. So if you look at kind of a visual of what this application looks like, you're talking about a home-based CRA out in California who visits a site, maybe returns back to a hotel room or to their home office, completes the report, submits it back to the CRO's home office where it's reviewed and commented on, and there's a bunch of back and forth, and then maybe a week later they agree that the report's in the final format and content. So then the document is printed, signed, FedExed to the home office. The project manager or the head of ClinOps signs it again and then submits it to the sponsor. Obviously, this is a very time-consuming, costly operation. In fact, some of the top 5 CROs that we do business with estimate that they spent between $500,000 and $1 million per year in priority mailing costs alone for paper-based documentation. Looking at the value proposition again for site monitoring operations, obviously security and compliance, but speed is very important. Being able to allow the CRAs to spend more time on developing high-quality reports and the productive activities of monitoring the sites, and not spend time on finding a printer to print out a document, sign it, and find a FedEx that's still open. Talking specifically about the cost of the ability to reduce costs associated with paper-based documentation, there's a number of sources that we can reference, including a study from about 10 years ago that was done by KPMG. They estimated that a typical document that's copied about 10 times cost anywhere from $18 to $20, as high as $120 if the document's lost or damaged. Jacques Pitney-Bowes from about 7 years ago did a similar study. For a single copy of a paper document from its birth on a printer, to its death on a shredder within a single location, typically cost around $10. And Pfizer did their own study going back about 5 years ago, where they estimated that the cost of a single wet signature and all the things associated with that would cost them about $30 over the lifetime of that document. Some of the unique considerations for site monitoring operations, I talked about the need to identity proof and authenticate someone before they're allowed to sign. Now, site monitoring is an open system, according to my definition, where documents may be signed by employees within an organization, but there's outside parties, such as the sponsor, that need to trust and verify these signed documents. So verification of the identity of the signers is still relatively easy and still provides high assurance. And this is because the signers, whether they be direct employees or contract CRAs, are ID proof during the HR onboarding or upon being contracted for a study, and typically added to the organization's user directory structure, and again need to authenticate against the network using their LDAP or Active Directory credentials. However, there's an additional factor or consideration here, and that's how do I bridge trust with these outside parties that I'm sending documents with? So how is this trust established? Well, this is a core concept of PKI-based digital signatures. So the relying party receiving the documents, needs to establish trust of the public identity of the signing organization. This is typically performed through a one-time signing ceremony. So if I'm receiving documents from a business partner, I don't need to implicitly trust the identity of each individual in sending me documents. I only need to establish trust in the organization's public identity in order to then trust all signed documents from any employees from that organization. And there's multiple methods to establish this trust today. The most common model is what's known as controlled trust. This is a ceremonial one-time process where if I'm signing documents, I'm going to put my company's public root certificate, public identity, on a web page and allow any outside party to take that public identity, that root certificate, and publish and distribute it throughout my company. There's the other trust models. Microsoft has a trust model. Adobe has a trust model. These web trust models are less common, and there's a constant battle between Microsoft and Adobe about who actually controls these models. Microsoft tends to be used for Microsoft documentation only, Adobe for Adobe documentation only. So there's no cross-trust established with these web trust entities. There's also another entity within the biopharma market called Safe Biopharma. Safe Biopharma is an organization that started about 10 years ago, a nonprofit that has their own trust model. Today it's only used by a handful of some larger pharmas. It's still not used widely, but it's an interesting concept for the marketplace. Now, the last application I'll talk about for the use of digital signatures is within eclinical portals. Specifically, I'll talk about signing of regulatory packet documents that are part of the electronic trial master file, the study binder. These are sponsor-generated forms, FDA-required forms. They include the IRB approvals, but also the investigator, sub-investigator, and coordinator signatures on things like the 1572 informed consents, the protocols, the trial agreements, and other documentation, as well as the periodic mid-study updates throughout the course of the study. Again, these are mandatory documents. Documents that the sponsor and the CRO must have the sites and IRB signed before they can initiate a site to start scheduling visits. Today, most sites handle these documents either receiving them electronically or in paper format. Regardless, they print them to paper, sign them with ink, and text the documents back to the sponsor or CRO. Looking at our world again, we're talking about documents that are generated by the sponsor, distributed by the sponsor or the CRO, out to the sites. The sites need to review these documents, sign them, also have their IRB sign them, and submit them back to the CRO or the sponsor, ultimately submitted to the FDA as part of the e-submission. The value proposition for digital signatures here is manyfold, but the main driver here for the pharmaceutical companies and the CROs is speed. It takes quite some time to initiate a site, and having a bottleneck being just the signatures on required documents is something that you want to eliminate to be able to focus on other activities where you can speed up the site initiation process. So graphically, it's showing this with site initiation, you're eliminating the bottlenecks where you're simply stopped at a stop sign waiting for a digital signature or an approval. And instead, you want to be on the Autobahn, or at very least using an easy pass to cruise through the toll booths at 60 miles an hour, not waiting in line to pay your $5. There's many approaches to delivering eclinical portals, and most of these approaches today support digital signatures. This includes software vendors that provide the eclinical portals, companies like NextDocs, Montreal, Pharmas Solutions, Perceptive Informatics, etc., and the SaaS vendors, so pay to use their software, as well as some of the traditional clinical trial management vendors entering this market. So trying to extend Siebel eClinical or Perceptive Informatics Impact out to include document management as well as document signing. And obviously custom applications. So particularly some large pharmas like to build their own so they can customize it to their own needs. Like the first two examples with quality management and audit support as well as trip reports, identity proofing and authentication is a different set of rules here with eClinical. So these are purely open systems, and a high percentage of the signers as well as the verifiers are non-employees of the company that's hosting the digital signature service. Identity verification, identity proofing is much more challenging. Now, when we consult with our clients, we usually recommend they start by benchmarking what they're doing today. So this benchmarking looks and examines what the needs are today in the paper world. Typically, the regulatory packet documents would be printed to paper, FedEx to the site, have the site review, fill, sign, and then FedEx back. And nowhere in this process did anyone actually verify who was applying that ink to that paper document and looking at their driver's license or other government-issued ID in order to verify that this person is indeed who they say they are. But that's the benchmark that we're dealing with today. That's not to say that we don't want to improve on this low level of assurance when we go electronic. So typically companies are striving for at least a medium assurance where their signers can be ID proofed, maybe by self-registering themselves or requesting them to enter enough unique information to establish themselves, including a verifiable email address, perhaps further enhanced by a phone contact, or even maybe having a CRA visit them in a face-to-face encounter during the site kickoff. Or this can include high assurance, so bolting on additional activities that further verify the identity of the signer. This can be the use of third-party verification services. There's companies like LexisNexis, Experian, RSA, Ideology that pull questions from public records and quiz the individual about things like, for the following vehicle, which of the following insurance companies have you had insurance with within the past 18 months? Questions and services we've all dealt with in dealing with web applications today. Regardless, once the identity proofing has taken place, then the signers are placed in an existing user directory structure. It could be the internal LDAP and Active Directory of the organization, or more commonly, like a SQL or Oracle database. And then the signers are forced to authenticate based on the username and password that they selected when they registered with the system. So in summary, leading quality management, document management, clinical trial management, and eClinical technology suppliers and vendors. Many of them support digital signatures. Many large sponsors and CROs are using today, and hundreds altogether, including medium and small life science organizations. With our own CoSign product, I can tell you that today 8 of the 10 top pharma use it, 5 of the top 10 medical device companies, and over 40 CROs. So the use of digital signatures is quite broad. Well over 20,000 different CRAs and well over 20,000 different sites and IRBs are using the technology today. Now I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And I'll also leave my contact details in here in case we run out of time, or there's a specific question that you'd like to ask me by simply emailing fda@arx.com.
Raj, thank you very much indeed. Kevin Davis from BioIT World back with you to run through some questions following that excellent presentation, and how refreshing to have such a non-promotional presentation as well. So I hope you found it very informative. We've had well over 100 people on the web symposium. We received a bunch of calls in advance, Rod, and I've had more than a dozen come in while you were speaking. I'm going to go through them as quickly as we can. Keep your answers brief if you could, so that we can try and get them all in. Some you may have covered already, in which case it's just make a note of that. We had a few people come in late, and there's no harm in just reinforcing a particular point. I've grouped them into four rough categories. We've had a bunch of questions on format issues, any on how widely accepted digital signatures are, some about the global acceptance of digital signatures, and then some technical questions, more specific questions, and we'll get to those before we reach the end of our time. So let me start at the top, and we'll work through them. And where people put their questions in during the webinar, I'll call out your first name, and that'll show you that you hear your question and hopefully the response. If Rod doesn't have time to really address the question quite to your liking, you have this email contact information on the screen, and he's made it clear you're welcome to contact him. And as you've already seen, slides will be made available via a link once the recording process is complete. That'll be in the next few days. So Rod, on the question of format, is there a standard format for electronic signatures among federal agencies?
Yes, at the U.S. federal government level, that's where I assume this is being driven by this question. U.S. federal government has standardized on digital signatures, so you won't see electronic signatures used, although perhaps there's some rogue departments or agencies that may use it to sign low-level things like expense reports or timesheets. But in general, the U.S. departments and agencies all use digital signatures. We obviously do a lot of business with the U.S. federal government. Likewise, in Europe, the governments throughout all of the EU all have standardized on digital signatures. Some of the governments in Europe are a little more loosey-goosey on allowing things other than digital signatures to be used. Other countries like Spain, Italy, Germany, etc., are very rigid and only allowing the use of digital signatures.
Okay. Are there any differences in electronic signatures between Word and PDF documents?
Again, I'll address this from a digital signature perspective, so a standard electronic signature or digital signature. Ultimately, the resultant signature is the same, and that you're able to sign a document, and the recipient of that signed document can verify who signed it, when they signed it, why they signed it, and what was signed. Because the file formats are slightly different, the features of digital signatures are a little bit different. With a digital signature applied to a PDF, you're always signing the entire PDF. However, you can make changes to that PDF, for example, if it's a fillable PDF, and re-sign it. As I mentioned before, you always get this versioning concept, so you can go back and compare how the changes took place over time. So there's an audit trail and revision history inside of a PDF. With Office, it's slightly different. With Office, you don't get a revision history. You get the ability to sign all or part of a Word or Excel document. And as long as no one modifies the content that's been signed, then the signatures are valid. Now, I know that Microsoft only supports the signing of the entire file and locks the file, but vendors like ARX have developed additional support to be a little bit more granular in what can be signed within a Word and Excel document.
What types of digital signatures are used? Is it just Adobe Acrobat, or scans permissible, other programs?
A digital signature is a standard, which includes the two main components of a digital signature, are a unique mathematical cryptographic key that's issued to a signer and secured by that signer that no one can ever access. And it's protected by a centralized server like in our CoSign product, or a smart card, a USB, and some alternate approaches, as well as an ID card for the signer. The ID card is the digital certificate. So with these two items, you can sign documents. You can include the digitized graphical signature. You can acquire these digital certificates and these signing keys in multiple ways, but the similarity is the same regardless of the vendor.
Jennifer wants to know, for the new 1572 in PDF format, the digital signature option is not compatible with the CoSign software her organization has. What can she do?
If you go to the FDA's website, the FDA has actually started to, they've always published sample forms like the 1572 in Word, time in HTML, and PDF. A few years ago, the FDA, for a few other documents, began to include additional logic to make the fillable forms easier to follow and complete correctly, as well as once the form's been filled, it reveals a button you can click to then digitally sign the document. This is a usable feature if you're signing with Adobe Acrobat. It's not so useful if you're signing with other techniques, including the way our CoSign supports it. But there's no requirement to use these forms. So you can take your own 1572 other document and configure it with the logic and the signature fields that you want in order to sign this properly.
Well, to talk a little bit about fee structure, and this question came from Cindy, is the typical fee structure by the volume of signatures, the number of users, or is it a set fee per month or per year?
Depends on the vendor. Some vendors charge purely by user. Some charge purely by volume. Vendors like my company, we have two models, one per signer, one based on number of signers, one based on number of signatures. So the number of signers model would work well with employees, whereas the number of signatures model would work well with outside parties like the investigators who may only sign a handful of times.
Okay, excellent. I've got a group of questions now talking about sort of how widely accepted digital signatures are and what some of the exceptions might be. The first two questions are sort of flip sides of the same coin. One is, are there any submissions to federal agencies that require ink signatures, or as Cindy put it, are there any regulatory or government bodies that do not accept e-signatures?
I'll answer the first part first, and then maybe if you can trigger me to ask the second question again. I think the first one might be driven by the use of the Electronic Submissions Gateway, the ESG, that the FDA has. If you toggle around, I know it's a little confusing to go through that website, but it explains where and when digital signatures might be required to use the Electronic Submissions Gateway. The dirty truth is that the FDA really could care less what the format is of the signatures on the documents that are part of the submission. It could be a digital signature, it could be an electronic signature, it could be a paper document that's scanned into electronic format. They really don't care. In fact, even with digital signatures, sometimes they prefer that you flatten that PDF so that the digital signature itself is no longer an active component. When the FDA ESG talks about digital signatures, in my mind, they're actually talking about a digital certificate used for authentication. So they want you to either acquire a digital certificate or create your own self-signed certificate in order to identify yourself as part of the submission, so that they know that the submission is coming from person X and all the associated documents will accept in just about any format.
Cindy's question was, are there any regulatory bodies that do not accept e-signatures?
If you read federal and state electronic signature directives, so the federal e-sign passed in 2009, whatever it was, and the state UEDAs. The state UEDAs echo the federal guidelines, and 46 states all use the same language. 4 states use modified variations. There's a few document types or application types that they say you can't use electronic signatures with, and this includes like bills, utility turnoff notices. I think there's one other document that strangely ended up in this language. I'm not that familiar with the electronic signature directive in Europe to say if any country specifically does not allow electronic signatures for certain applications, but it's very small.
All right. Let's take the next two questions. What are the requirements for electronic signatures on archive eCRFs, case report forms? Or Michael wanted to know, can the digital signature process be integrated with various CTMS or EDC systems used across the industry? So just take those specific examples, eCRFs, CTMS, and EDC.
Okay, so eCRFs first. We do a lot of business with EDC companies, and they're using our product for internal use to sign quality control documents to support audits. This includes, all the largest players in this marketplace. To date, we don't have any of those vendors using our CoSign product as part of their product or service offering to sign the eCRFs. And honestly, the FDA really doesn't care about the format of those electronic approvals within the system. So in general, digital signatures aren't being used for that. That said, we do have some CRO customers that have developed their own EDCs and want to use CoSign to sign the ECRF. So in these cases, our customers are just saying, hey, it's a signature is a signature. We use a digital signature even though it may not be required, but it suits our needs.
Right.
The second part of the question was
CTMS or EDC systems.
CTMS, or what was the second part?
EDC, electronic data capture systems.
EDC. Yeah, so I talked about EDC. CTMS, digital signatures obviously are commonly used in any type of collaborative ecosystem where trust needs to be bridged across multiple organizations. And so this has been a target for us over the past 8 years as we've targeted the life sciences marketplace. And I originally thought that CTMS would be the perfect market for us to go after. What we found out is that over the past 5 years, is these investigator portals, these eclinical portals that are very document-centric and providing the ability to visualize and sign and manage study binder documentation, regulatory packets, and ETMFs. This is where digital signatures are being used, whereas the CTMSs are really just a dashboard pulling information from different databases. Now, that's the rule. The exception is now some of these CTMS vendors are starting to pay attention to the document world and considering adding digital signatures.
Rod, early on in your presentation, you showed a certificate, and Jennifer wanted to know, she asked, the certificate shows an expiration date in the background, while the key does not truly expire, she writes. So how do we explain that to an auditor?
Again, it depends on the technology chosen, whether you went with a vendor or built it yourself or use our CoSign product. I'll talk about our CoSign product since this is what I know. With CoSign, keys are generated and certificates generated for an individual as soon as someone adds them to Active Directory or whatever the network user directory structure is. Likewise, if you pull someone out of Active Directory or the user directory structure, instantaneously that key is deleted and the certificate revoked. Or if you modify information about an individual, that will be automatically refreshed in their certificate. Or at the end of each year, if that user is still a valid user in the Active Directory group for CoSign, it's going to go ahead and renew that certificate. So this is the way we manage certificates. If you're using like a smart card-based approach, then it's a different story, and you would have to ask those vendors. But the bottom line is you have employees wandering around with smart cards with certificates that may or may not be valid. So it's much more challenging to have to retrieve those smart cards in order to revoke the certificates and signing keys.
Okay. This next question
as far as the verification of signed documents is concerned, Kevin, as far as the verification is concerned, you don't have to worry about what happens if you have a document you're verifying it past the expiration period of the certificate of the signer, because the applications only look to see if that signer had a valid certificate at the time of signing. What happened after that is irrelevant. All you're looking for is to see, was this a valid user, a valid signer at the time the signature was applied.
Okay. This question came in on the web yesterday. Has there been resistance from clinical trial sites in using this technology? DCRI, I'm not sure what that stands for, but DCRI, the question goes on, is getting ready to use an e-document management system to facilitate and manage regulatory and contract documents for participating sites. It does involve digital signatures. So has there been any resistance from the sites that you know of?
For the person who asked that question at DCRI, I happen to know what's going on there, so they can contact me directly. But I'll talk about the macro view. Sure, sites are resistant against technology. Some sites are resistant against technology in many ways, with EDC, with digital signatures, with other type of tools. What we found the best approach is to give them the ability to use the technology without having to download any software or hardware. They can just access signed documents through the internet and have the user interface for the signing environment to be very simple. And we'll only require them to be prompted to enter your username, enter your password, enter your reason code, and the document signed.
Okay. DCRI, I'm told, is the Duke Clinical Research Institute. A question, a couple of questions that we'll just roll into one, and we'll have to keep the answers nice and short now, Rod, to squeeze in as many questions as we can in the time remaining. The global acceptance of electronic signatures, how much are electronic signatures already available to HCPs participating in clinical trials in the rest of the world? How is it applicable in developing countries like India, for example? And what are the requirements for HCPs outside the US to get electronic signature tools? Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
You talked about Europe a little bit, but what about India and China and places like that?
Well, India is unique in that India is one of the few countries in the world that's actually tried to enforce the use of digital signatures by citizens. So when you submit your tax returns in India, they're trying to force all the citizens to have to use a unique digital signature they acquire from the government to sign their documents. So I'm not even familiar with the technology they're using, but I can only imagine the logistics of managing a billion-person digital signature deployment for signing tax returns. Regardless, their legislation considers and accepts digital signatures. There's bound to be countries in the world, developing countries, that don't understand what a digital signature or electronic signature is and have their own unique requirements. That said, we do business in just about every country in South America and most of the countries in Africa, and obviously the major players in Asia as well. So for the most part, unless you're conducting a study in an unusual geography, which we can talk about, these countries accept digital signatures and electronic signatures, by the way.
Squeeze in some technical questions now. I apologize in advance. We're just never going to get through every question. I've seldom seen a response from the audience like this, so that's good. It means ARX will have to sponsor another web symposium and we'll get you back. On the technical side, Cindy wanted to know, does this system fulfill SOX, S-O-X, e-signature requirements? Once signed, can the signature be erased? There's a two.
Sure, I didn't talk about SOX. I think I'm on a slide today. When I was talking about FDA audits, it's any audit. It's an internal audit, HIPAA audit, SOX audits. But yeah, sure, we have clients that use it exclusively for supporting SOX compliance.
Okay. Once signed, can the signature be erased?
It depends on the file format that you're signing in the application associated with how you're managing that document. For instance, in the way we sign office documents, you can choose whether anyone, no one, or only the signer can remove signatures. Likewise, PDFs, they have their own unique settings, and with either of these, you also have the option to, make read-only the documents after they're signed. Or more importantly, most companies don't care too much about this if they're storing the resultant signed documents in SharePoint or some document management system where there's a revision history. So even if someone can go in and try to remove signatures, upon check-in back into the repository, it's going to version it, and you'll see, hey, someone's fooling around with the documents.
Tina asks, how do you ensure that the PDF signature isn't created by a person who is not actually the person? So could somebody create a signature for somebody else?
Yeah, so I talked about this with the identity verification. And, tying the ability to give someone a credential to sign with to HR onboarding policy and procedure and user directory structure, or through some type of, outside party, a site that you put them through some exercise to prove who they are. That's the way this is handled. With Adobe specifically, you'll notice that Adobe allows you to create a self-signed certificate just to play around with the technology. And then if you want to use production use for Adobe, they'll point you to ARX or one of their partners. A self-signed certificate's like an ID card you created in your basement. And it may get you in your kid's treehouse in the backyard, but it's not going to get you to get a check cashed at the local bank or get you through security at the airport. You can always create your own certificate, but the ability for someone to trust it is a different story unless it's an organizational trust as opposed to an individual user trust.
A few more questions before we close. Susan wanted to know, how does the electronic signature last through time when looking at new technology? 10 years ago, for example, we were using entirely different electronic media.
Again, why I mentioned the PDF is used more commonly. So in case you're not aware, the ISO 32000 standard for the PDFA, the PDF archive standard, includes digital signatures in its definition. What this standard tries to do is to come up with a standard that's published and maintained over time for how you can create a viewer to make PDFs human readable in the future and obviously verifiable from a digital signature perspective. So even if Adobe goes out of business or whatever vendor takes over that market, go out of business, is you can still have access to a verifier and a viewer to verify these PDFs. Microsoft, that's your decision. Microsoft hasn't had the best track record as far as backwards compatibility. They're getting better. But if the retention period of documents you're signing is a short period of time, then perhaps signing them into Word or Excel or some other format is fine.
Okay. Cindy again asks, do e-signatures work with mobile security software such as Mobile Iron?
For signing purposes, when we're talking about mobile computing devices, we're talking about the ability to sign documents from iPhones, from iPads, from other smartphones, etc. For document signing, there's other uses of the technology, not to be confused with things like signing of web servers and things like that, which is a completely different technology. But as far as making the technology usable, this is talking about the clinical sites adopting this, I can tell you that accessing, filling, and signing a document on an iPad is convenient. I've done the same thing on an iPhone, and, doing lots of things on an iPhone or any smartphone is a little more challenging with the limited real estate you have on the display.
I think we'll make this a final question, Rod. This is from Eve, who asked, how can a small company providing clinical staffing and healthcare services do digital signatures? Can we integrate your digital signature system into our home-built application? Are there some standards that we can use to build our own if we can't afford your ARX system?
Yeah, I would suggest that you contact me. We deliver our CoSign product, and CoSign is a product, it's not a service, to a lot of small entities. We have CROs of less than 20 employees, as an example. You can build your own. I mean, you can use Microsoft CA, Microsoft Certificate Authority, and then glue together a bunch of things to make your own digital signature infrastructure. But again, the reason to contact me is that the cost of the certificate and the signing key is inconsequential to the cost of managing your own digital signature infrastructure. And many companies, including J&J and Pfizer, who are the early pioneers in this market, found out that managing a homegrown digital signature infrastructure can be very painful from an ongoing support perspective.
Rod, thank you very much. The presentation was great, and the Q&A, I think, very instructive for our audience. We've crept over the hour mark, and I think we should draw this to a close and let the audience get on with their other chores. Thanks to everybody who sat in on the webinar today, the BioIT World Web Symposium on Enhancing Clinical Operations with Digital Signatures. Our thanks to ARX for sponsoring the Web Symposium, and of course our guest speaker, Rod Schlerf, who handled the presentation on his own, which is rare, but I think the value of the information was exceptional. So many thanks to you and to all the questions. And on behalf of my colleagues who put this symposia series together and did it flawlessly as usual, I'm Kevin Davis for BioIT World. Thank you again. And for those of you who didn't get your question answered, again, I apologize, we ran out of time, but you can contact Rod directly, and I've no doubt he will gladly take your questions offline and be as responsive as he can. So thank you to ARX, and thank you all for listening. Kevin Davis, goodbye for now.